Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 82, A Tale of Two Counties, Orange County, California, and Marshall County, Alabama, of a year-long conversation. I'm sorry. I meant to say the Alabama Liberal Podcast. That's the thing. The first about 10 episodes of the second season, I kept calling it a year-long conversation. That's not really accurate anymore because number one, it's not a year long. It's gone past a year. And number two, it's no longer a conversation. So in 4 words, I've told 2 lies. Every word in a year-long conversation is a lie. So I had to switch it to Alabama Liberal Podcast. But I think it might still be called a year-long conversation out there in the interweb and various places that host the podcast. Sometimes you think about it being a conversation is certainly easier because when you're just talking to yourself 30 minutes to an hour or sometimes over an hour, I can see why Alex Jones is crazy. I really can. Because when you watch Alex Jones's show, he's just sort of ranting and raving. I don't even know if he still has a show, but when I used to watch clips, it was all him by himself. There's very few other people involved in that. A bare bones crew. It would surprise me if he had more than 10 people around him editing it, filming it, doing the lighting. It would shock me if he had that many, honestly. So it just felt like it's him out there talking. And when you do that, like right here, what I'm doing, you just sort of stare at the wall and talk to yourself for 30 minutes or an hour until you run out of gas and you get tired, and then you're like, well, I'm kind of hungry or want to use a bathroom or got to sneeze or something, and then you just end it. That's sort of what you do. And you can think about things. Your mind's traveling through space just about as you're doing it, the stars. And when you do that enough times, as he did it every day for years, I could see where that would kind of make you crazy after a while. You spend so much time by yourself. Maybe fluoride in water makes frogs gay. Maybe that does sound like a reasonable thing that people think, and he stands kind of alone because so many people on the right wing, I don't believe that they actually believe what they're saying. I think like Sean Hannity, I don't think he believes a word that he says. I don't think he believes half of what he says. I think he knows Trump is crazy. There's been reports that he said, yeah, Trump's nuts. I think they know that, but I think Alex Jones genuinely believes what he's saying. I think that for other people like Sean Hannity, you got to think like, is that better or worse? To not believe what you're saying and say it anyway. Is that better or worse? Maybe it's worse. I have to think about, I'd love to be famous. I'd love to be a media pundit, but do I want it that bad that you could go out there and just make shit up and, deliberately say things you don't believe? I mean, do you want it that bad that you could be Tucker Carlson? I don't know. That seems hard for me to wrap my head around, but somebody like Sean Hannity or Glenn Beck, they pretend to be crazy to get famous. Alex Jones is crazy. He means it. Thinking about it not being a conversation anymore, it makes me think that I'd love to have my old podcast co-host, Michael, with me on this one, because it's going to be a lot about Marshall County, Alabama, which I'll get into that in a little bit. Our home county, I think he might have moved there in middle school or something, but for myself, I was pretty much born there, raised there, lived there almost the entirety of my life until I went to college. And then after college, 2008, recession, can't find a job, so lived there 2 more years. And so it really sort of is a place I know quite a bit about. Don't know as much about Orange County, have barely ever been there, went there once by mistake, didn't enjoy it, came back. No, I'm just kidding. I've been there a few times. Anaheim is in Orange County, and that's where Disneyland is and some other stuff. So I've been there a few times, but you don't really get the culture of a place when you go to a theme park where people from all over the world come. People might think, well, why those 2 specific counties? They don't seem to have a ton of stuff in common. But Marshall County, Alabama used to be, and I know this sounds crazy, but it used to be solidly Democratic. For most of my lifetime, it was. And I know that sounds nuts now because now it's the haven of the right wing. Now it's almost the power center of the right wing. People in Alabama may not know this. Will Ainsworth, the lieutenant governor, he seems more conservative than Kay Ivey in a lot of different ways. May not necessarily know who he is. I predict you will know who he is because Kay Ivey's getting older. People say she's a daytime drunk. Her heart's barely in it. Can't debate, can't host a debate, can barely hold a press conference without slurring her words. If she ran again, it would be a surprise to me. And 2022, of course, is coming up. Ainsworth is almost certainly would run for governor if Kay Ivey weren't in the way. And we're dealing with this thing now where Trump's gone. They want him to be gone. I think he wants to still be in the conversation a hell of a lot more than most ex-presidents want to be. But the people underneath him need him gone. Now, these people who want to be the next him, they didn't vote to impeach him. But I'm sure in their heart of hearts, if he had been impeached, they would have loved it. You can't tell me Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley and all them, they wouldn't have loved for Trump to have been impeached. And I'm talking about in the Senate. I'm talking about being convicted and also banned from further office. So that way the conversation can fully focus on them. No more of this, who knows? Maybe I run again. Maybe I'll beat them for a third time. You've not beat them once. First president since Benjamin Harrison to lose back-to-back popular votes. You have not won a single election. Anyway, I don't want to get into that. With Trump, it's difficult because I'm almost in this place, and I wonder if a lot of you listening to this are in the same place where I do a podcast, but I don't want to talk about him. He dominated this podcast so much to where from the very first episode came out January 2016 or February 2016, but very early into 2016, me and Michael doing that. Trump dominates, not necessarily is about the first episode, but he's in the first episode. He goes on. We talk about him throughout. He survives. So he's been a huge part of this podcast from the very beginning, and now we're finally post him. We're out of the Trump presidency. The Alabama Liberal podcast has survived. We have survived the departure of a co-host. We have survived Tulsi Gabbard's candidacy. We've seen Ted Cruz's 2016 candidacy come and go. 2 different Bernie Sanders candidacies come and go, and we've seen Trump horrifically stumble ass backwards into the presidency, then get impeached. We were there for the first impeachment. We were there for the second impeachment. We've seen him leave office. And so now it's almost like, wow, what's next for the next, where we're going to get up to 100? Like, what's next for that, where Trump's out of it? And now, in the most unlikely turn of events, Joe Biden's president, which I don't know if a lot of people would have predicted that in 2016 when we started doing this. It really becomes an interesting question of, do you not talk about Trump at all? I would love to, but he is a factor in things, and he is still out there, and his base is still out there. Now, I predict in 6 months, people will begun the process of moving on. In a year, it will almost be like he's completely tiresome. We're so sick of him, we can't stand it. But for now, he's still kind of out there for the remainder of this podcast. And so I'm almost like the people in the Candyman movies where I don't want to say his name. Like, it's almost like Beetlejuice. You say his name 3 times and he might show up. So I'm almost to the point where I don't want to say his name. I'd rather call him Voldemort or something, where it's almost like he who shall not be named, but people will know who I'm talking about because he plays such a huge role in things. He plays a role in this podcast where we have Marshall County, Alabama, the Republican Power Center. So Will Ainsworth is the lieutenant governor for Marshall County, Alabama. Steve Marshall is the Attorney General for the entire state of Alabama, for Marshall County, Alabama. Trump's last day in office, he pardoned Ed Henry. Ed Henry was a state legislature who represented part of Marshall County, part of Coleman County, but some of it was in Marshall County. And you might think, well, what was so important about this man that Trump's final day in office, that's what he decided to do, was pardon that guy? We have multiple figures now from Marshall County, Alabama, that have become statewide figures from this relatively tiny county. My hometown has fewer people in it than have died from coronavirus in my new town of Los Angeles. Los Angeles, because we talked about COVID culture last week and why it's different. In Los Angeles, it's completely different than Marshall County. Go to Marshall County, there's no mask mandates. They don't enforce them if there are some. A lot of people are raising hell and pitching a fit. At the grocery store one time, my mom told me there was a man there. They were at Aldi's or something like that, I think, and he wanted to buy all the vegetables he could get. This is early on into the pandemic when they were kind of rationing vegetables and fruits and things like that. They said, no, we specifically say 5 per customer or whatever it is. And if you come in here and buy all of them out, then all these other people are not going to have any. And then the people after them, and it's a pandemic. You can't be selfish like that. The guy pitched a fit, raised hell in the store, not wearing a mask, of course, screaming at everybody because he was such an ass. Then when he left, my mom, she's big into the county. She knows a lot of people. I think maybe knew the cashier. And she goes, wow, do you get a lot of people like that, man? She goes, we get that man. He comes in here about once a week and pulls this bullshit because he buys up all these fruits and vegetables and takes it to Birmingham and raises the price. He charges double in Birmingham for this stuff because they can't get it, and it's a big city and they have a harder time getting it. The old people really want fresh fruits and vegetables. They just about cream their fucking pants over this stuff. So he takes it there and jacks up the price and raises it. So this man who is phrasing it as like, I'm a Tea Party warrior, I'm fighting for freedom, the Constitution, George Washington's rolling in his grave. He's just a greedy bastard. He's just going to Birmingham, jacking up the price and getting more money for that. And of course, that's the GOP in a nutshell. Greedy, overbearing people. They come on like they're Tea Party patriots and Constitution. It's all about money. And that's America in a nutshell. On the one hand, we are the first country in the world to be founded over religious freedom, and people breaking apart from a country and saying, we want freedom, we're tired of the British Empire, we want to get rid of that. We're also the first country in the world to be founded over a tax beef, because we were a colony. A lot of people seemed fine with that arrangement with England until we didn't want the taxes. So it's a tax beef and a freedom thing. Tax beef sometimes masquerading as freedom. where maybe George Washington and Jefferson and some others, they just got tired of paying the taxes, but it's about freedom as well. And so we confuse those things. We kind of wind them together. That's why in some ways I think the socialist wing of the Democratic Party, I think they're doomed to fail before they even get started, because again, this is a country founded over a tax beef. When you have someone like AOC, Joe Biden's trying to pass this third stimulus, which desperately needed. Everybody loves it. Everybody wants it. And they take it to the Senate. And I hate that Joe Manchin and some others killed the $15 an hour federal minimum wage. I despise that. I don't know why they did that. I think that sucks. I've talked about before that it's not even realistic to think people can live on that amount of wage. Like, that's not even a realistic wage. So I hate that. And I also hate that they limited some of the payments. They didn't want people making over $80,000 a year to get that amount of money. And I don't make that amount of money, so I'm still going to get a third stimulus check. But AOC took objection to some of these things. And on Twitter, she's like, well, this isn't the bill that we passed in the House. I don't know if I can vote for this. And I thought, fuck off. No, your fucking constituency in the area you represent, very few of those people make more than $80,000 a year, or $160,000 as a married couple. That's even rarer. $160,000 as a married couple. Come on, cut the bullshit and stop this spicy Karen routine where you're out there just like constantly drawing attention to yourself and wanting to speak to the manager and wanting more and more responsibilities when you're not qualified. Pass the bill that everybody wants, which I'm so glad Biden was able to get this done. But to see that bill and see that it went to a 50-50 tiebreaker vote, meaning not one Republican voted for this in the Senate or the House, is astounding. It almost makes you think Republicans are brain damaged in a certain way, because what did they do under Bush? They took Bill Clinton's budget surplus, and Al Gore famously said, I want to put that into Social Security and a lockbox where people, they made fun of him. Lockbox, what's that? He wanted to make it to where politicians couldn't raid it. He wanted to make Social Security solvent forever, where you'd basically never have to worry about it again, which would be a huge relief to people like me, and kick this can down the road where every 10, 15 years, Social Security is going to run out of money or whatever, which Republicans won't, so they can privatize it. But what he wanted to do is make it solvent forever. George W. Bush said, nah, let's blow it on a tax cut nobody needs in the middle of a raging bull market. Doesn't that sound like a good idea? So he blew Bill Clinton's budget surplus on a huge tax cut that the rich people loved, and then inevitably Bush had a recession anyway. 2008 had the Great Recession. Nobody cared that trillions of dollars had been squandered on a tax cut. Nobody needed. Now we get to Trump. Comes in there. Obama's got a raging bull market going on. The economy's fantastic. Inherits one of the best economies he could ever take. What's he want to do? I want to take money and spend it on a tax cut in the middle of a bull market, which makes no fucking sense, to rich people who don't need it. Oh, and by the way, poor people are going to pay for it even worse than the Bush tax cut, because we've got to eliminate some things they were using before, some tax loopholes for mortgages, for middle-class people, some other things like that. For most middle-class people, their taxes went up. I know mine did, but the rich people enjoyed a $2 trillion tax cut in the middle of a bull market, which they didn't need. And inevitably, he had a recession anyway. So now that there's been a recession and a pandemic and everybody's like, oh my God, we got to do something about this. The minimum wage hasn't been increased. The infrastructure's falling apart. You see stories like in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, I believe it was, a school collapsed on itself is how shoddy the building was. You have bad infrastructure. You have healthcare rising astronomically out of control. You have minimum wage hadn't been increased. Poor people have we can't take much more of this shit. This is why we rioted. Really, I believe a lot of people rioted during the George Floyd things. It was about 25% racial justice and 75% we're broke as fuck and we're sick of it. We've had it with this shit. And we've been trapped at home, and we don't like being trapped at home for a long time. That's why you saw the looting and different things. Republicans come in, they're like, we hear you loud and clear. We need to eliminate the estate tax. That's what they're planning right now. Not one Republican in the House or Senate voted to approve this third stimulus, meaning that if Georgia had not gone the right way, if Perdue and Loeffler had not lost in Georgia and Ossoff and Warnock had not won, we would not get a third stimulus. Now think about how incredible that is, that we would not get a third stimulus if it all didn't come down to Georgia, a state that has not had two Democratic senators in decades, didn't vote the right way in a runoff in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, everything had to go exactly the right way for it just to be 50-50 and come down to Kamala Harris. And Joe Manchin still tried his goddamn best to kill this bill every way he could think of. I don't want these people to get it. I don't want that people to get it. Let's take out this. But just think about that. The $1,400 stimulus check that I assume most of you are going to get, you would not have gotten that if Democrats didn't control the Senate, which is why it was so desperate for us to control the Senate, because it's so important. And the Republicans have multiple people going to retire. Pat Toomey's going to retire in 2 years. Richard Burr's going to retire in 2 years. Our Alabama Senator, Richard Shelby, has just announced that he's going to retire and not run again in 2022. So these people have literally nothing to lose, and they didn't vote for it the right way anyway. That's why when Roy Blunt in Missouri is like, yeah, I'm retiring, and everybody's like, oh, there goes another one of the moderates. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? I mean, I understand that maybe he looks moderate compared to Josh Hawley or Marjorie Taylor Greene, but this is what we keep letting Republicans get away with, is moving the goalpost of where a moderate is. Mitt Romney is labeled a rhino, even though he votes with the Republican Party like 91% of the time. He only votes for Bernie Sanders about 25% of the time. This is what we've let them get away with, and it's kind of scary. And I think that we got to look at where it has come. So this is an unofficial trilogy. The first episode, what's the future of the Republican Party? We have that one. And then last week was about the culture wars. And then now we have this one, which is kind of a little bit about the past. So we're slowly time traveling back to the past. We did the future, the present, and now the past. Because Marshall County, Alabama used to be solidly Democratic controlled. Hinton Mitchum, which some of you may know him and some of you may not, but he was the Senate leader in the Alabama State Senate. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but for most of my life, Alabama, the state legislatures, they had a Democratic state House and a Democratic state Senate. And that's kind of interesting to think about this. And I'm talking about this one all the way up to 2010. They had Democrats in control of the state legislature. It hasn't had a Democratic governor in a little bit longer than that. But even though Alabama has been thought of as a solid red state for decades and has not won a Democratic presidential candidate since the 70s, the state legislature was still Democratic controlled all the way up to 2010, which is fascinating to think about. So you have Marshall County, Alabama, this tiny, not very well known, somewhat obscure county up in the northwestern part of Alabama, not that far from Huntsville or Chattanooga or Birmingham. Those are almost form a triangle around it a little bit, and those are the nearest big cities around it that you might have heard of. It always kind of struck me, like I went to Auburn and people would say, where are you from? And they were from Alabama. They'd lived in Alabama, and I'd say, you know where Albertville is or Gunnersville or Boaz? And they'd say, no, we never heard of that. So they didn't know what it was or didn't know much about Marshall County. Well, you should now, because a lot of your state leaders and legislatures are coming out of there. You have this county that was Democratic controlled for the majority my lifetime. Hinton Mitchum, literal leader of the state Senate for the entire state. Kind of a big deal, right? Well, then 2010 comes along. But you had all these great state legislatures like Hinton Mitchum and Frank McDaniel, he was a Democrat, and Lowell Barron, he was an Etowah, but he was another Democrat. 2010 comes along. The Democratic wave is replaced with a Republican wave. Lowell Barron loses to Shadrach McGill, which the only reason people probably know who that asshole is because his wife went on social media and talked about the hoes trying to message her husband and stuff. I don't know if people remember this mini scandal, but apparently women were trying to talk to Shadrach or seduce him, or so they said. I mean, who knows? But she came out and was like, I wish all these hoes would quit talking to my husband, and then he eventually didn't run again or whatever. But I thought, wow, Lowell Barron, master Alabama state politician, traded in for Shadrach McGill, who barely lasted. Same thing for Hinton Mitchum and Frank McDaniel. They had somebody like Wes Long in Marshall County, was a Republican. Eventually didn't run again because of a corruption scandal. You have a lot of these longtime Democratic lines, and they get replaced with these sort of disposable Republicans. Oh, Shadrach McGill didn't work out? Don't worry, we got Wes Long. Oh, Wes Long didn't work out? Don't worry, we got Clay Schofield. And so they kind of burn through these people, and they don't mind replacing them over and over again because it's Republicans. They can just get another one, and they have more money, so that way they can just sort of replace them and repeat them. This is why I kind of don't fully believe in term limits, because I actually don't think it would make any real difference, if I'm being honest, because, well, we're seeing that now. Like I literally just said, Burr and Blunt and Shelby and all these Republicans in the Senate are going to retire. They have absolutely nothing to lose from supporting Biden on some of these bills, and they're not going to anyway. And so with term limits, they think that it'll make them more likely to compromise. But we're not really seeing that. Like the newer generation, like Josh Hawley and Marjorie Taylor Greene that are coming in, they're less likely to compromise. AOC on the Democratic side, Tulsi Gabbard on the Democratic side, these people are more rigid, more ideologically bent, more set in their ways. And so it almost seems like they got to be in there for a while before they even really begin to understand the other side, or they begin to adapt or whatever. And Republicans, I think, they always talk about term limits, and I've noticed that they seem to be really for that for some strange reason. And we take that and run with that as liberals and say, well, it'll end the status quo. I don't think it will make any real difference, because I think Republicans like it because then the longtime liberal lions, like Bernie Sanders and some people like that, they'll be put out to pasture and they can get rid of them. Like in certain red states, the only way that somebody like Joe Manchin, even though people say, well, he's a dino and he's barely a Democrat, and all that may be true, but at least he votes the right way on some Supreme Court things, on some very important stimulus packages. So at least he's probably the most ideologically flexible member of the Senate in either party, an actual swing vote, but he's at least going to be better than a Republican that would be in his place in West Virginia. Like, do I love Joe Manchin? Of course not. But do I like him versus the Republican that would have his seat? Yeah, I do. Because I don't believe that Paula Swearingen, who all the liberals that are progressive, they love her because she's very progressive, but is she going to win? Of course not. She ran last time in 2020 and got beat in a blowout, got fucking killed. So I don't think that we're going to necessarily get, you look at some of the very progressive candidates that we ran last time, and they all got whooped. I mean, Jamie Harrison got beat, and the woman in Tennessee, Marquita Bradshaw, got beat, and Paula Swearingen got beat. It was almost like we weren't really even trying to win those. Do I think that Joe Manchin is the best we're going to get in West Virginia? Yeah, I think he probably is. But the reason that people like term limits is because a lot of Democrats that actually get in there in red states, they have a lot of name recognition. And if they were to be term limited out, then it would be very difficult for Democrats to keep building up that name recognition every 2 or 3 cycles. This happened in Indiana. Evan Bayh was the Democratic senator, and now he's out. You can see things like that happening. I think it will be difficult if John Tester in Montana, if he were to ever lose re-election or get term limited out, it's not easy to keep finding really high-profile name-brand Democrats to keep putting in these seats. But Republicans don't care because they've got more money and they can just dump a flood of money. The candidates are disposable to them anyway. They can burn through people like toilet paper and just keep putting a new person in there because they can take $100 million and put it in their super PAC and then just be done with it that way. And we're seeing that. I mean, look at Orange County, where you had an entire county that was Republican forever. So they're the flip side of Marshall County. Marshall County was Democratic county for over 100 years. And then you have Orange County, which was a Republican county for about the same thing, notoriously Republican county. Let's take a look at Orange County for a minute. Now, people may be more familiar with it because in California, if you met somebody, be like, where are you from? Orange County. Are you a Republican? Yeah, how'd you know? I mean, it was that basic. It was that much like, wow, it was really obvious. Moving here and living in Los Angeles, being out somewhere, there was, I remember an Indian woman that was very conservative, and it was almost to the point of like, wow, who are you, Ann Coulter or something? I mean, like, this is ridiculous. And I'm like, are you from Orange County? Yeah, how'd you know? So, I mean, it sort of becomes that way where it's a little bit like it's culturally ingrained in a very specific way, and it's been Republican forever. They helped sway California red back when it used to vote red in all the elections. They helped win it for Nixon back in 1960. Now imagine how crazy this is. In 1960, JFK won Texas and Richard Nixon won California in the presidential election. California was red and Texas was blue. Now they've swapped and flip-flopped. And I think sometimes there's that old joke about the war that goes on for so long and then the sides switch places, basically, like goes on for just decades, and then they swap places. And I think that's kind of happened in a way with the culture wars. Sometimes people are beginning to swap places. Texas went from blue to red. California's gone from red to blue. Nancy Pelosi's district was Richard Nixon's old congressional district. Now imagine how crazy that is. Richard Nixon's old congressional district is now represented by Nancy Pelosi. So you can see real change. In Marshall County, Hinton Mitchum's old state Senate district is now Marshall County, Alabama, home base for Will Ainsworth, Lieutenant Governor, and Steve Marshall, Attorney General, who are very, very conservative. The guy I went to high school with, David Ferguson, he was a I guess you might say campaign manager or political pundit or whatever you'd like to phrase it as, sort of all the above, I guess you might say. He helped run Robert Bentley's campaign and helped Robert Bentley get into the governor's mansion. I mean, if Rush Limbaugh and Ann Coulter had a baby and Bill O'Reilly raised it, it would look a little bit like Ferguson. He's quite conservative, but this is another Marshall County alum that's big in the Republican Party of Alabama. With Orange County, we have sort of the opposite transformation going on. Republican forever, and is slowly becoming purpley at the congressional level, blue. They went for Hillary Clinton in 2016, and that was the first time since FDR that they had went Democratic in a presidential election. Orange County, the home county of Richard Nixon, by the way, I think I left that part out, but the home county of Richard Nixon, and where Ronald Reagan, another California Republican, he said Orange County is where all good Republicans go to die, right? It's sort of a retirement home for Republicans. It has basically become Democratic controlled at the congressional level because they, in 2018, 7 Democrats elected to Congress from Orange County, which is the first time that had happened in forever, in eons and eons. I mean, I think it might have been the first time it had ever happened. 7 Democrats. The whole county is Democratic. But now, unfortunately, they've backslid. In 2020, 2 of the Democrats lost the election to Republicans. The Republicans, interestingly enough, both of them are Korean. And that's the thing. When you go and look at specifically Orange County, because the county itself is still Republican. The sheriff is a Republican. The tax assessor is a Republican. The district attorney is a Republican. You go and look at the board of supervisors, 4 out of 5 are Republican. Basically, their equivalent of a school board is almost solid Republican. It's still way more Republicans than Democrats. But when you look at that too, it's a lot of white women and Koreans, either women or men, some Vietnamese people. So it's almost all Asians and white women that are their Republican Party in Orange County. That's almost the exact opposite of Marshall County. That Republican Party is almost exclusively white men, pretty much exclusively white men. I'll give you another example. Kerry Rich, who's the state representative for Marshall County, who sucks, by the way, he's a real piece of shit, but my mom ran against him in the Republican primary for state representative. If you can believe that now. Alabama Liberals' mom running as a Republican, but she did. We don't have to agree on everything. We don't agree on everything, but one thing I know is that she's the best person I've ever met. I mean, talk about someone with true integrity. Never met a stranger. Everybody loves her. People who hate me love her, and I don't blame them. You know, I really don't blame them because she's really, really nice. And just a good, solid person of integrity, which they desperately need more of in Montgomery at the state representative level. Be like, Alabama is one of the most corrupt states in the country. Robert Bentley resigns over a corruption scandal. That's how Kay Ivey became governor. Luther Strange appointed to a Senate seat in a quid pro quo with Bentley. Roy Moore, the state Supreme Court judge, he ran for the Senate. People know him as the Senate candidate, but he was yanked off the bench. Senate leader Hubbard indicted by the FBI on 15 counts. This guy, Ed Henry, that I'm talking about, who was a state representative, a Republican, was convicted of Medicare fraud. This is who Trump pardoned on his last day in office. Over and over again, you see the Republican Party in Marshall County, it's completely corrupt, which is no surprise in a one-party system like that, which Alabama is. The governors are Republican, the lieutenant governors are Republican, the attorney generals are Republican, the treasurer, the secretary, on down the line. The state Supreme Court is almost fully Republican. 6 out of the 7 congressional districts are led by a Republican, and poor Terry Sewell, the Democrat, her congressional district looks like a Picasso painting. They chopped it up so bad. I mean, it's truly, for a Republican, it's a thing of beauty. For anyone who cares about liberty, it's a thing of horror. They have cut part of Birmingham and part of Montgomery and these pretty much all black rural counties in the western part of the state. They've cut all these things together that just barely even touch. Her district should be 2 separate districts with probably 2 different Democrats. Alabama should be probably 4 Republicans and 3 Democrats at the House Representatives level. That it's 6-1 shows you that some serious fucking gerrymandering is going on. So it's a very corrupt system when you have the entire state controlled by one party rule, basically. With Don Siegelman, you have a guy who was the governor and railroaded on a bullshit charge, which everybody knows was bullshit, but he was a Democrat and they wanted to railroad him. He was convicted because they put him on trial with Richard Scrushy. He was the Enron of the time at the Alabama level. He gets convicted, and then when they convict him, handcuffed and manacled like he's Hannibal Lecter and whisked away to a Louisiana prison, not an Alabama one, because in Louisiana, that'll make it harder for his family to see him, makes it harder for his lawyer to see him, all these different things. He spent 6 6 long years in prison. But Barack Obama never pardoned him, a huge mistake on Obama's part, because he didn't want to look partisan. He was afraid of how it would look. And that's the difference. Democrats are so terrified of how things will look, or we don't want to be called partisan, or it's almost like a political party that's afraid to be a political party. And in that way, Republicans have a serious advantage because they have balls. This thing right now with Andrew Cuomo, if that was a Republican, he would say, I ain't going nowhere. And fuck you for suggesting I should. If I was him, that's what I would do. But it's like, oh, well, now Cuomo, he's not resigning. He's not going anywhere. Why is he not already resigned? I'm like, have we learned fucking nothing? Look at the New York politicians, all Democrats that Republicans have railroaded out on personal bullshit. Eric Schneiderman, the New York Attorney General, he had to quit his sex life, basically, something that was personal, that had almost nothing to do with his job. Then you had Anthony Weiner, of course, as a notorious example. Then you had Elliot Spitzer, another governor, who resigned over something personal that really had nothing to do with his job. I'm like, how many times are we going to do the same shit? These are 3 New York politicians that are pretty high profile, pretty well known, all had to resign over personal sex beefs. And now we've got Cuomo and Democrats clumping at the bit. I'm like, you just sit there and said, oh, well, now we rushed to judgment on Al Franken. We shouldn't have been so quick to dismiss him, and all rallied around and said he has to leave. And well, now we shouldn't have done that to Al Franken. Andrew Cuomo has a Me Too accuser. He needs to resign. Why has he not already resigned? This is bullshit. Why is he still there? I'm like, this is nonsense. This is absolute fucking nonsense. And yet at the same time, you got Piers Morgan over there trashing Meghan Markle years after a date gone wrong. I thought the contrast could not be clearer. You've got Andrew Cuomo, who actually does something. He's actually needed and necessary. And they want him to leave. Who's basically calling for this? Republicans. But they still want him to leave and get out of there because they hate him. They hate him because he's a high-profile Democrat and his brother is a CNN anchor that they also hate. I thought Republicans hate this family and you're going to let them run out and not defend them and not hold them up. Who's mostly asking for him to leave? The media, the number one fucking problem, which Republicans think that the media is liberal. I don't see it that way. But the number one problem, these media so-called journalists, in quotation marks, who never learn a thing. And then number 2, Republicans in the state legislature who have been asking him to leave and calling for probes and all this other shit, trying to make hay out of this when half them are doing the same damn shit. But if they said, oh, well, we need you to resign, I ain't going nowhere. I'm not leaving. Fuck Me Too. I don't believe in Me Too. They don't believe in Me Too, but they're going to use it to get a high-profile Democrat out of office. And that makes me sick, and they do it all the time. Joe Biden, he made racially insensitive comments. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? You've supported Trump for 4 years, no matter what that man has said, and now you're going to come out here and be like, well, now Joe Biden, he made some racially... I thought you were so full of shit. You don't care about racism and insensitive comments. You just don't like Joe Biden because he's against your guy. You don't care about the Me Too movement or sexual harassment. You're just against Cuomo because he's a Democrat. I mean, even with these tweets, Neera Tanden, Joe Biden's choice for the Office of Budget Management, was denied a place in his cabinet because Joe Manchin was worried about some of her tweets being insensitive. And the Republicans are like, oh yeah, these tweets are way off the line. Donald Trump had to be thrown off of Twitter. Probably the first president ever who will ever be thrown off of Twitter. And they're worried about Neera Tanden's tweets. I'm like, are you fucking kidding? You gotta be kidding me at a certain point. It is blatant hypocrisy and so obviously politically motivated. And the fact that we're falling for this yet again, it just kills me. I think Republicans have an advantage on that score because they're large and in charge. They don't really care what people think. They're going to do it anyway. This thing with Cuomo, they would not resign. And this thing with the stimulus checks, Democrats would be absolutely terrified to not have one person vote for a program that's going to give people $1,400. That would be political suicide for the Democrats. For Republicans, they don't care. They're like, we're going to do it. Who cares? We're still going to take back the House in 2022 anyway. I mean, it's insane to think that they've done all this shit. And you'd think they would be in contrition mode. You'd think it'd be like, well, boy, we sure let Trump run away with everything, and we didn't rein in, that Capitol mob like we should have, and that insurrection got out of control, and man, maybe we're embarrassed that we didn't vote to convict Trump in the Senate. Maybe we should have. You'd think there would be contrition after how badly things have gone with COVID, with Trump, with the Capitol insurrection, with the recession, with the raging pandemic that they didn't do anything. I mean, you'd think there would be a minute of shame. But no, we're not going to vote for a stimulus check for the vast majority of the country just because we don't feel like doing it. And then we're also going to talk about getting rid of the estate tax and inheritance tax. I'm like, this is unbelievable. This is like they've learned not a damn thing. And because nobody holds them to account, because every time that the media should be shaming them for not voting for necessary stimulus checks for Americans, they're off covering Andrew or Neera Tanden's tweets, or giving Republicans aid by playing up this Dr. Seuss bullshit where 6 books were pulled or something like that. I'm like, they can't stay focused on the essential for a minute. And if a Democrat sticks their PP anywhere it shouldn't be, oh my God, a sex scandal, and they run to go cover that shit. Like, it even fucking matters. Like, it matters at all. It doesn't matter. But they're willing to run away, Andrew Cuomo, because he's a Democrat, where Piers Morgan is able to stay on British news shitting on Meghan Markle for years. This is absolutely absurd. Now, people, they can choose the Queen or Meghan Markle, whoever they want to believe. Different people can have, you can disagree. But one thing I am certain of, Piers Morgan's an unnecessary asshole. And he's been an asshole wherever he's worked. He's a lifelong dickhead. When he worked for Rupert Murdoch for those British tabloids, he bragged that he was hacking people's phones. He was main one of those responsible for that. People might remember when Hugh Grant and some other celebrities were like, hey, our phones are being hacked by the British tabloids. Piers Morgan was editor of those at that time. And I don't just mean Hugh Grant, but like even people who were in the media, even regular people who somehow became tabloid sensations and didn't want their privacy invaded for obvious reasons. He thought it was okay to do that. So he does that, gets big doing that, which is terrible to start with, invades people's privacy, leaks things that shouldn't be leaked, things that are supposed to be private. Then he goes into media, becomes friends with Trump through The Apprentice, leaks Trump's boots. Larry King gets pushed out, takes over Larry King's spot for a very awkward year. People hated him, didn't want him doing that. It's hard for me to imagine anybody likes Piers Morgan, because literally for my entire life, I mean, I've always hated him. Everybody I meet hates him. Like, I hate Piers Morgan. He's obnoxious. He's full of shit. He's a blowhard. I can remember way back when I lived in Alabama with my parents that I mentioned before, and Access Hollywood or something was on, and he was the guest co-host, or they were interviewing him or something like that. My mom's like, oh, Piers Morgan's on. Turn the channel. Just him being on TV, you turn the channel. This is one thing left and right can agree on. Red and blue can agree. Piers Morgan's an asshole. Nobody wants to watch him on TV. But he liked Meghan Markle, clearly had a sexual crush on her. She didn't return and he's been out there bad-mouthing her. It seems jealous that she picked Prince Harry over him, which is absolutely goddamn ridiculous. Like, oh yeah, who's old enough to be her dad. And how could she possibly pick Prince Harry, prince of the royal family, and a veteran and a soldier? That's how much integrity he has, is he's also a veteran who's also a prince. I mean, this is like a Hallmark Channel movie, the soldier veteran prince who goes to Afghanistan and is also the royal family or whatever. Of course she's going to pick Prince Harry. I would pick Prince Harry, right? This is like one of the best guys on the planet. If my daughter brings somebody home for Thanksgiving one day, I'm going to be like, are you Prince Harry? No, I'm not. You're not good enough. I think the only person alive who's good enough to date my daughter is the equivalent of whoever Prince Harry is in 20 years, okay? That's the only person I think will be good enough. But of course she picks him over Piers Morgan. And then his wife comes out and writes a piece against Meghan Markle. And it's like, I don't believe a word she says. I'm like, this is really interesting, I think. Kind of really an interesting dynamic that he's married when he met Meghan Markle, when she so-called ghosted him, when she so-called picked Prince Harry over him. And the whole time he's been bad-mouthing her, and even today, the whole time this has been going on. So it's a little bit like Fatal Attraction, but Glenn Close is also married. It's a very strange dynamic. It's one thing to, have a crush on a beautiful woman, but to hound her for years after she's gotten married and had 2 kids, and Piers Morgan is mostly a conservative, mostly a Republican, and they don't care. He quit that show, Good Morning Britain. And this is how bad it is because a guy, one of the only people of color who works on that show, a guy named Alex Breziford, who I like, was like, Pierce, he was bad-mouthing Markle again. He says, we get it. You don't like her. We've heard it dozens of times. We understand, but you have a personal thing. But she cut you off. She's entitled to cut you off if she doesn't want you around. And then he got so pissed off, he left the damn studio and quit the show. That's how much that he was proving a point, that's how irrational he is on this subject, that he couldn't listen to that for even 10 seconds. He's been badmouthing Meghan Markle for years, but he couldn't listen to 10 seconds from the other side without getting pissed off, quitting, storming off the set and quitting the entire series. But he quits, not because necessarily he's being pressured to, because the right wing doesn't care, but just because he can't stand the slightest bit of personal criticism. Cuomo's like, hey, I can take the heat. I'm staying, and I'm not going to make the same mistake all these other Democrats have, where you run Al Franken out of office, and then 2 weeks later, oh, we shouldn't have done that, made a mistake. If Andrew Cuomo quits right now, within 6 months, people will be like, well, we really shouldn't have done that. We rushed to judgment. Oh my God, there's a sex scandal with Chuck Schumer. We got to get him out of office. It's like they learn not a fucking thing. They don't learn anything. And this goes back to Orange County, because you had Representative Katie Hill, who was, you could say, revenge porn. Her husband, I don't really care about the details, but he had leaked some photos of her and maybe that she'd slept with one of the women or something on the I don't know. It was a mess, but I don't think she should have resigned. And she resigned due to pressure. And then she came out and said, well, I really shouldn't have resigned and all this stuff. And it was almost like, yes, people should stop quitting the second these scandals break. They should wait 3 fucking weeks and let the media get bored and go to something else. They should stop being fired for this. And I wish people who get fired over this stuff, I wish they would start suing these companies that do this, because this is just pure, all it is politics and somewhat celebrities, because celebrities get targeted. That's it. Katie Hill, she has to quit because Andrew Cuomo, he's got to quit. Do you go into a frozen yogurt store and say, I need to speak to the manager, and then have the manager come out there and say, have you ever sexually harassed anybody that you work with? Or have you ever been accused of sexually harassing anybody that you work with? We don't hold everybody to this standard. It is just for elected officials and people in the media. And for Elliot Spitzer to be forced out because he slept with a prostitute or whatever. Do you go into an Applebee's and say, I need the manager, and the manager comes and you say, do you own this? No, of course I don't own this. Okay, get the owner on the phone right now. Get him on the phone. And then you get the owner on the phone and say, have you ever slept with a prostitute or paid for one with the money from this Applebee's? Because I need to know before I can contribute this. Just because you vote for somebody, you're not entitled to tell them who they can sleep with and how long and when. It doesn't entitle you to their personal business. The same way, if I pay to go out to eat, I don't get to find out that manager and that owner's every sexual picadillo that they've ever had. I'm not entitled to that, and I don't expect to be. And that's the difference. I don't care who a politician is screwing. I care if they're screwing the American people. I care if they vote yes on a stimulus check that's going to give me $1,400 and everybody I know $1,400. And I think that's the difference in the two parties that needs to be called out more. So in summary, we have Orange County, which was Republican forever and is becoming bluer, getting really good in 2018, has regressed a little bit to now have some, I'll say it, I don't give a shit, people get mad, token Asians in the Republican Party that they have clearly promoted so they can say, look at how diverse we are. Look at this diversity that we've drug out. Been calling it the Kung Flu for a year. All the people in the Asian community talking about they've experienced all these hate crimes or whatever, mostly from Republicans. But if we can ever find one that's conservative as fuck, we're going to put them in the office or whatever. Why is that? Asians benefit a little bit from prejudice. People think, they're good at math, they're smart, they're dependable. It's been proven in study after study after study that Asians are way more likely to get hired for a job than black people are. And Orange County, one of the reasons it is so conservative, the black population is almost non-existent. I had to look up this, but it said it's 2% black in Orange County. Now compare that to Los Angeles, which is obviously much more diverse. Not that much Latino for a California county, and yet that's where most of the Democrats come from. But because you have an enormous Asian population that's mostly very conservative, hyper-conservative, and a white population that is as well, that gives you why it's been so Republican for so long. Whereas in Marshall County was Democratic forever, but then became Republican in 2010. Why? As a reaction to Obama. That's what it boiled down to, was Obama. Obama, as I heard people call him over and over again. That Tea Party wave of 2010 was mostly about race. And so even though the two counties are apart, they're somewhat similar because some of this is racial politics. And that plays a really big role in a lot of counties all across America. Why they're red, why they're blue, racial resentment that fueled the rise of Trump. It's why a lot of people vote for him, is these cultural grievances that people talk about. This idea that power is slipping from us and we must do something about it, or else we're all doomed. And you saw this with the goddamn Dr. Seuss books. They pulled 6 Dr. Seuss books. The way that right-wing media covered this, you would have thought Joe Biden personally went to the publisher and said, pull these 6 books or we're going to tax the shit out of you. No, nobody in the Democratic Party was asking for this. It's something that they did on their own because they wanted to. And let's be honest, probably a business decision because they're sitting on this huge catalog of these 6 books. And look what happened. After they pulled those books, Dr. Seuss sales went up through the goddamn roof. Now, I know that's a cynical interpretation. Some people don't like that, but that is probably some of it. Dr. Seuss was number one in the book charts that week. Good way to get a long dead author, been out there a very long time. Good way to get his name in the conversation, isn't it? Say, oh, we're going to pull a couple of these books. They're selling for $1,000 on eBay. Well, who owns thousands of copies of those books? The publisher and the Dr. Seuss family that made the decision to pull them. So they're going to make a lot of money off that. And then the other books that they didn't pull, like Green Eggs and Ham and Cat in the Hat, they all went up through the roof sales-wise. Because everybody's like, oh, well, we need to buy these books before they're the next ones to get banned. The people that pulled it, maybe they did it for the right reasons, but they sure made a lot of money off of doing that, didn't they? Yet all we hear about is a decision made by a private company and the estate of Dr. Seuss, I'm assuming his kids or whatever, who probably would love the Republican plan to get rid of the inheritance tax. They're making money hand over fist by doing this. No government pressure, no Twitter pressure, no Democrats saying you must do it. And yet who gets blamed for it? The Democratic Party. This is why people say, this is why I vote Republican, because of shit like this. Now, I don't understand this at all, because with Joe Biden and what he's trying to do, I get what he wants to do with health care, and I get how he can do it. I don't understand how Ted Cruz can legislate political correctness when Republicans run on this platform of, I'm going to stand up to political correctness. How? Joe Biden's plans for infrastructure and health care and the stimulus, they're very clear to me. And it's very clear to me how government can enact those plans. It's not clear to me at all how Republicans can stop political correctness or cancel culture or campus culture or what the fuck they can do about it at a legislative level. They can't do anything about it. And it gets worse when they're in office. So you'd almost think, well, if we want it to stop, because they said this the whole time Obama was president. Millennials are out of control, cancel culture is bad, political correctness is off the charts. Then Trump gets elected, you'd think they would shut up because they're in charge. They went even more crazy. Oh, this is outrageous, this is so bad, this is what we're talking about. Then Biden gets elected and we're back to the same thing. So it's almost like, at what point do you realize that cultures change, they shift? It doesn't really matter who's in office. Barack Obama, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, you're as pissed off about these things no matter who's in charge. And it really doesn't matter that much. And maybe it's not a political problem. You're talking about a cultural problem as though it's a political problem, and that's what's driving your votes. And I don't understand that. And people keep doing it over and over again. They cut off their nose to spite their face, in that politics is about money, mostly. Your health care, your college. The Democrats have passed every plan ever that's benefited the middle class. Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment benefits, the GI Bill, Pell Grants. All these are Democratic ideas. Every idea ever that helped the middle class has come mostly from the Democratic Party. I can't find one that the Republicans came up with on their own and promoted and wanted out there. So your money is politics. That really should control mostly how you vote, but people use culture. And that's just about all they use. Because the culture shifted is why Orange County began to go blue for the first time in eons, and why Marshall County is now solid red when it never was before. Interesting, isn't it? Okay, everybody, thanks for listening. Join us next time for episode 83.